Everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, crumbled when my daughter handed over the keys to my $2 million villa and smiled as she walked away. I can still see it in my mind. The first day I stepped into that villa in Beverly Hills. It wasn't just a house, it was my sanctuary. I had spent decades building my business, saving every penny, sacrificing family dinners, vacations, sleep, everything just to get this place. It was supposed to be my legacy, my retirement dream, a home where I'd finally be at peace, surrounded by family. I had envisioned my daughter, her husband, and maybe even my future grandkids sharing this place. But that was before she betrayed me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The phone call came early, the kind of call that freezes you in place, makes your chest tighten and your hands sweat. It was my lawyer, the one man who had helped me navigate the maze of life's legal complexities for years. But today his voice was strained. "Louis," he began, his tone heavy, "you need to come in. There's something you need to see. It's about your villa." I didn't need to hear more. I already knew. I had felt it in my gut for weeks, ever since I'd noticed my daughter's growing distance, her sudden lack of interest in the house. I could feel the weight of betrayal coming long before it hit. When I arrived at his office, the air was thick with unspoken words. He handed me a letter from the county, the one piece of evidence I hadn't seen coming, the one thing that once I read it would destroy everything. My daughter, without consulting me, had transferred the ownership of the villa to her in-laws. And just like that, my future was in someone else's hands. I scanned the letter, the details blurring as a mix of anger and disbelief rushed through me. September 2018, just a few months ago. My daughter, the one person I had trusted most in this world, had done this behind my back. No warning, no discussion. I had worked my entire life for this house, only for it to be given away like a worthless piece of property. I called her immediately, my hand trembling as I dialed her number. I had to hear it from her, to confront her. She answered the phone with an unsettling calmness. "Dad," she said, her voice soft but strangely detached, "I think you said'll understand. We had to do this for the family." "For the family?" I repeated, my words shaking with disbelief. "What the hell do you mean by that?" "It was a family decision, Dad," she replied, as if that somehow made it okay. "Yusef worked hard for this, but it's time for us to move forward. We needed it more than you know." The words stung, cold, calculated, and utterly heartless. She wasn't asking for my permission. She was justifying a decision that had already been made, and in that moment it hit me harder than any punch ever could. She had sold me out. I stared at the phone, my grip tightening around it, almost as if I could squeeze the reality out of it. My daughter, the woman I'd raised, trusted, and fought for, had just handed over my life's work without a second thought. I could feel the walls closing in as I stood there, in the middle of my villa, the silence of the place deafening. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my home, but now it felt like a tomb. The villa wasn't just a house. It was everything I had fought for. It was my retirement, my legacy, my peace. And in one swift, cruel move, it was gone. Before I could say anything more, she hung up, leaving me alone in the empty space that used to be filled with dreams. The bitterness of the betrayal sank in like poison. This wasn't just a financial blow, it was a personal wound. A daughter handing over my retirement to her in-laws, and with a smile no less. The echo of my footsteps on the polished floor felt like the sound of a life unraveling. But I wasn't going to just let this slide. I couldn't. This was my fight now, against my daughter, against the world she had chosen to stand with. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let some greedy in-laws walk away with my legacy. I stood there in the cold, empty villa, the weight of what had happened pressed down on me, but deep inside something else started to build, a spark of determination. They hadn't just stolen my house, they had stolen my pride, my trust, and that was something I wouldn't let slide. It wasn't just about the villa anymore, it was about justice. It was about making them pay. The game was just beginning. In the days that followed, I became a stranger to myself. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The house that had been my sanctuary now felt like a prison. Every room seemed to mock me, reminding me of my failure as a father, as a man. My daughter had turned her back on me, given away the villa like it was nothing. And yet, what hurt the most wasn't the financial loss. It was the emotional devastation of knowing that my flesh and blood, someone I had loved unconditionally, had betrayed me. I spent days alone, consumed by the weight of what had happened. I couldn't bear to face anyone. Friends, family, even the people who had worked for me all those years. They all knew the villa was meant to be my retirement, my last reward after decades of hard work. But now, it was gone. And in the silence of my own thoughts, I couldn't stop hearing the echo of my daughter's words. "It's a family decision, Dad." I replayed the conversation in my head 1,000 times, each time hoping for a different outcome. But there was no changing what had happened. She had made her choice, and I was the one left to pick up the pieces. I didn't visit the villa for weeks. The thought of seeing someone else living there, touching the furniture, walking through the rooms I had poured my life into, made my stomach turn. I tried to avoid the news, the phone calls, anything that would remind me of the loss. It felt like I was losing my grip on everything. My identity, my purpose, everything. I tried to distract myself with work, but even that didn't feel right anymore. Every document, every contract I signed, seemed pointless without the one thing that had driven me for so many years, the villa. The house was supposed to be a part of me, something I could pass down, something that would live on after I was gone. But now it was in someone else's hands, someone who had no right to it. I even tried going to the gym, hoping to clear my head. But as I lifted weights, I found myself staring at the mirror, wondering who I even was anymore. Was I just a man with a bank account and a few properties to my name? Was I just a father who had lost his way? The questions gnawed at me, eating away at the core of my being. Then one night, I walked past the villa. I had no intention of going in. I just wanted to stand outside and stare at the place that had been mine. But as I stood there, watching the lights flicker through the windows, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't live with the knowledge that my own daughter had betrayed me like this and walked away without a single moment of regret. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the letter from my lawyer, the one that confirmed the transfer of ownership. It was still fresh, the ink still smudged in some places. I stared at it, my finger tracing the words like they might somehow give me the answers I was looking for. But they didn't. All I had were the facts. The undeniable truth that my daughter had stolen my future, my legacy. The rage inside me began to build, hotter and more relentless with every passing minute. It wasn't just about the villa anymore, it was about justice. About getting back what was rightfully mine. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. So I called my lawyer. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Louis," he said, his voice calm. But I could tell he knew what I was calling about. He had been expecting it. "We need to act," I told him. "I want to fight back. I want to take her to court, make her pay for what Sip's done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this? Sip's going to be a long battle. Sip are about to tear your family apart." I didn't hesitate. "I don't care anymore. She took everything from me. I want it back. I want justice." He sighed. "I understand." I start preparing the case. "We need everything, the property transfer records, bank receipts, anything that proves she did this without your consent." That's when I knew the battle had begun. I was no longer the victim. I was the one who would make them pay. But as I walked away from the villa that night, something else gnawed at me, something deeper. Was this really justice? Or was it just my pride fighting back? I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't live with the thought of letting them get away with this. The fight was on. It's funny how revenge isn't just about anger. It's about strategy, patience, and cold calculation. The night I made the decision to take action, I felt a surge of clarity wash over me. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt in control again. But this wasn't going to be a fight of emotion. It was going to be a battle of facts, of evidence. I would fight not only for the villa, but for everything I had lost. My trust in my daughter, my peace of mind, my very identity. I didn't go back to the villa for a few days after that. I needed to plan. I needed to be sure that I wasn't just acting out of impulse. This wasn't going to be some reckless attack. It had to be methodical. Every step had to be calculated. I called my lawyer the next day, the sound of the phone ringing filling the silence that had overtaken my life. "Louis, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Once we start this, there's no going back. You could lose more than just the villa." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I've already lost more than I ever thought I could. This isn't just about the house anymore. This is about making sure they understand that they can't just take everything from me. I'll lose my daughter, sure, but I'll be damned if I lose my dignity and my future." "All right," he said. "I settle start gathering everything. We settle need proof, property records, bank receipts, contracts. But you know this one set be easy." "I don't take care," I snapped. "Do whatever it takes." And so, the planning began. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and legal documents. My lawyer dug into the records, trying to find any scrap of evidence that could expose my daughter's manipulation. But I knew it wasn't just about the legal papers. It was about uncovering the truth, piece by piece. I started digging into her relationship with her in-laws, something I had always ignored in the past. I should have paid more attention, should have seen the signs. But now it was too late to go back. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their relationship than I had realized. I reached out to an old business partner of mine, someone I trusted, and asked him to look into the financial transactions between my daughter and her husband's family. I needed to know everything: the payments, the gifts, the deals they might have made behind my back. He was a good man, and he owed me a favor or two, so he agreed to help. "Louis, you are treading dangerous ground here," he warned me as we sat down to discuss what he had found. "These people, they separ not just after your house. They separ after something bigger, your legacy, your wealth. You need to be careful." "I know," I replied, my voice low, but I said, "not backing down, not now." As the days passed, my friend unearthed some troubling evidence. There were unexplained transfers between my daughter and her in-laws, large sums of money that didn't add up, a pattern of financial transactions that suggested something more than a simple family decision. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. This wasn't just about a villa, this was about betrayal on a level I hadn't even imagined. I started to plant seeds of doubt in my daughter's mind, though I didn't know if it would work. She wasn't stupid, and I knew she had her guard up, but I wanted her to feel the pressure, to start questioning whether she had done the right thing. So I casually dropped hints, brought up the idea of family loyalty in a way that made her squirm. It was a subtle play, one that would take time to develop, but I knew it would start to eat at her. "Are you sure this is what you want, honey?" I asked her one night when she came to visit. "Once it said it's gone, it said it's gone. There said it's no coming back from this." She just shrugged, her eyes darting around the room as though she was avoiding something. "I don't set know what you set you're talking about, Dad. Everything goes fine." But I could see it in her face, the cracks, the doubts. She wasn't as confident as she tried to appear. I wasn't just playing for the villa anymore. I was playing for something bigger, the trust that had been shattered, the respect I had lost. But there was one thing I was certain of: I would get my revenge, and I would get justice. And as I made my plans, the weight of the coming battle pressed on my shoulders. I wasn't sure how long it would take, but I knew this: when it was over, I would have won. I spent hours late into the night, reviewing every document, every transaction. It was exhausting, mentally draining, but I couldn't stop. The deeper I dug, the more evidence I uncovered. It wasn't just about recovering what was taken. It was about exposing the truth. I had to make sure that when it was all said and done, my daughter would understand the full extent of her betrayal. Every step I took felt like I was slowly stepping into a war zone, but there was no turning back now. The first few weeks of planning were slow, painfully slow. Every document, every phone call, every email felt like a step toward reclaiming what was mine, but it also felt like I was losing something else, something intangible, something that couldn't be replaced. But I wasn't set backing down. I couldn't set. My lawyer, John, was working tirelessly behind the scenes, digging through the property transfer records, making calls to secure the right evidence. He was a man of few words, but every time I spoke to him, I could hear the determination in his voice. "I've got something, Louis," he said one afternoon, his voice steady. We traced the records back, and there steps a gap, a small but crucial one. The transfer of the villa was done correctly. There's something fishy here, and I think we can use it. I felt a surge of hope rise in my chest. This was the break I needed, the legal loophole that would tip the scales in my favor. I didn't waste a moment. The next day I met with John in person, in his cluttered office filled with files, papers, and legal books that smelled of ink and old leather. He slid a manila envelope across the desk toward me, and I could feel the weight of it, as if it contained all the answers I'd been waiting for. This document, John said, tapping the envelope, is the smoking gun. It sets a fraudulent act of signature. The contract that your daughter and her in-laws signed to transfer the villa wasn't valid. We going to use this to go to court. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The document inside was clear, a forged signature. The name on the document wasn't even mine. It wasn't even my daughter's. I stared at it for a long time, letting the reality of it sink in. My daughter had been complicit in a crime, a calculated, deliberate crime. I felt a rush of bitterness in my mouth. Anger, yes, but also a kind of sick satisfaction. The first real piece of evidence was in my hands. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was a fight for my legacy, my future, and my dignity. I left John's office feeling a strange calmness. It wasn't relief, it wasn't joy, but it was the certainty that I was moving forward, that I was on the right path. I couldn't let my emotions control me. Not now. This was a war of attrition, and I was just getting started. In the weeks that followed, the investigation deepened. John and I reviewed the evidence, prepared for the next steps, and strategized on how to present it all in court. We began building our case, piece by piece. Every document, every email, every call had to be documented, organized, and presented at the right time. Timing was everything. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from my daughter. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she had already won, but I was going to make sure she knew exactly what she'd done. The thought of facing her in court made my stomach churn, but I couldn't back down. I couldn't let her think she could get away with this. I spent nights going over every detail. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. If I was going to win this, I needed everything in order. I couldn't afford to miss a single piece of evidence. Every receipt, every bank statement, every email from her to her in-laws, it all had to be lined up perfectly. It felt like a game of chess, each move calculated, each strategy meticulously planned. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided. I was the man in control, and with every day that passed, the walls around my daughter's betrayal closed in. But it wasn't just about the villa anymore. It was about showing my daughter that there were consequences to betrayal, that loyalty, family loyalty, was sacred, and when it was broken there were prices to pay. I had already started to see cracks in her defenses. The last time we spoke, I could tell she was uneasy, shifting in her seat, avoiding eye contact. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know how far I was willing to go. I hadn't told her about the forged documents yet. I hadn't even hinted at what I had uncovered. But every conversation, every encounter felt like I was playing a dangerous game of chess with my own flesh and blood. The tension was building. It was only a matter of time before I revealed the full extent of her betrayal. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the manipulation ran. My daughter wasn't just following her husband's lead, she was complicit in the lie. And now I had the proof to expose her. The thought of confronting her in court, of tearing away the layers of deceit, made my heart race. But I was ready. The calm before the storm is always the hardest part. There's something unnerving about being so close to a showdown, about knowing that all the pieces are finally in place, yet having to wait. I spent the following weeks preparing for the inevitable, but the longer I waited, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I wasn't just fighting for my villa anymore. I was fighting for a sense of justice that had been taken from me. I was fighting for closure. The evidence had been gathered. The documents were ready. John, my lawyer, was putting together our case. I had the forged document, the emails, the bank statements, everything we needed. The timing, however, was critical. We needed to make sure we struck at the right moment before my daughter and her in-laws could cover their tracks. John was confident. He was always confident, but I could see the strain in his eyes. This wasn't just a case, it was personal. He knew what this meant to me. He knew what I had already lost. "You stir ready, Louis," John said one afternoon when I met him in his office. "We spe've got the legal grounds. All that Seps left is pulling the trigger." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the nervous energy that buzzed inside me. I wasn't afraid of losing, I had already lost. What I feared more was the fallout, the inevitable rift that would come with taking this to court. My daughter would never forgive me. The family would never be the same, but the alternative, letting them get away with it, was unthinkable. "I spin ready," I said, though I didn't set fully believe it. "Let Seps do it." John handed me a letter he had drafted. It was a formal eviction notice for my daughter and her in-laws. It wasn't just a legal document. It was the beginning of the end for them. With one signature, I would force them to vacate the villa. With one final push, I would take back what was mine. But something in me hesitated. I didn't know if it was fear or doubt or just the weight of the entire situation, but as I held the letter in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger at play here. Was this really about the house, or had I been fighting for my own pride all along? I couldn't afford to question myself now. The legal battle would be hard fought, but it was the only way. The only thing that gave me any comfort was the thought of the victory of seeing my daughter realize what she had done, of showing her that betrayal has consequences. The private investigator had uncovered something crucial, a fraudulent contract that tied my daughter directly to the property transfer. But there was still a chance that my daughter and her in-laws could fight back. They were wealthy, they had connections, and they were ruthless. This wasn't going to be a simple legal case. It was going to be a battle of wills, and I had to be prepared for anything. Late one night, after everything was set in motion, I sat alone in the villa, staring at the walls that once felt like home. I thought about my daughter, the woman who had once been my pride and joy, the girl I had raised, taught, and trusted, the girl who had now taken everything from me. The silence in the villa was deafening. My thoughts echoed off the walls. My anger, my betrayal, and my hurt were all wrapped up in one, but there was no turning back now. The damage had already been done. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just let her walk away with everything. And yet, as I sat there staring at the shadows on the walls, a question lingered in my mind. What would happen after this? What would I be left with once the villa was back in my hands? Would it even matter? I knew I had to win this. Had to make sure that the in-laws paid the price for their manipulation. But would it fill the emptiness I felt inside? Would it bring me peace? The truth was, I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything I had sacrificed. The letter was signed, the case was set, and the moment to act was drawing closer. I didn't know what the fallout would be, but I was ready to face it head on. I had been patient for too long. The storm was coming, and there was no way to stop it. The quiet before the storm was almost unbearable. But the storm was necessary, and when it hit, it would be a storm they would never forget. The closer the court date came, the more the weight of everything pressed on me. I could feel the tension building in my chest with every passing day, a slow burn that wouldn't go away. It wasn't just the fear of losing. No, I wasn't afraid of losing the villa anymore. It was the fear of losing everything else. The relationship with my daughter, the family I had fought so hard to build. The betrayal had already shattered me. But this was going to tear everything apart. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in weeks. She had stopped answering my calls, stopped showing up to family gatherings. I think she knew what was coming. And if she didn't, she would soon enough. The last time we spoke, she tried to downplay everything, pretending it was all part of some bigger plan. She even tried to make it sound like I was overreacting. "Dad, it's not like that," she'd said, her voice a little too defensive. "You're just being stubborn. This is what's best for all of us. Best for all of us." The words still echoed in my mind, each one sharper than the last. There was no best for all of us. There was only what was best for her and her in-laws. She had taken everything from me, and now she was pretending it was for my own good. The lawyer John had been relentless, preparing our case with precision. Every shred of evidence had been reviewed 100 times. The forged document, the bank receipts, the secret emails, they were all part of the puzzle that we were slowly putting together. We had them cornered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't the only one preparing for the fight. My daughter had hired a team of top-notch lawyers, ones who were known for winning even the most difficult cases. They had resources, connections, and experience, and I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. It wasn't just about the villa to them, it was about power. And power was something they didn't give up easily. As the days passed, the tension between my daughter and me reached its breaking point. Every conversation felt like a battlefield. She was no longer the little girl I had raised. She was someone else entirely, someone who had chosen to stand with her in-laws against her own blood. I watched her from a distance, her every move growing more erratic, more desperate. She knew the walls were closing in. She knew she had made a mistake, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. And I wasn't about to make it easy for her. The rest of the family started to take sides, too. My sister called me one afternoon, her voice filled with concern. "Luis, you need to back off. This is tearing the family apart." I could hear the worry in her voice, but I didn't care. "No, Jane," I said, my voice firm. "What steps tearing the family apart is what she did. What they did, they stepped taking everything from me. And I stepped not backing down." I could feel her silence on the other end of the line. She didn't agree with me, but she understood. And in some ways that made the situation even worse. The family was splitting apart, not just because of what had happened, but because no one knew where to stand anymore. I spent more time at the villa, now preparing for the inevitable. Every room I walked through, every piece of furniture, every inch of space felt like it had been tainted by my daughter's betrayal. I couldn't escape the feeling that my entire life had led me to this moment, that the house, the family, the trust I had built were all about to come crashing down. But there was no turning back now. The court date was set. The lawyers had gathered the evidence. The eviction notice was in hand. The storm was coming, and there was no way to stop it. But as the day drew closer, I began to wonder, was it worth it? Was reclaiming the villa, making my daughter pay for her actions, worth the price I was about to pay? I didn't have the answer. All I knew was that I couldn't let them get away with this. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. The courtroom was cold, the kind of place where every word felt like it would echo forever. My lawyer sat beside me, his expression calm, but I could see the flicker of anticipation in his eyes. The battle was about to begin. I watched as my daughter and her in-laws walked into the courtroom. They were confident, smiles on their faces, as if this was just another day for them. But I could see the cracks in their armor. They knew the evidence we had. They knew this fight wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. I clenched my fists under the table, steeling myself for what was to come. The courtroom was about to become the battleground for everything I had lost. It was more than just a legal case now. It was personal. And this was just the beginning. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. I could feel it in my bones, the heavy weight of everything that had led to this moment. The room was cold, the sterile hum of the lights overhead making everything feel detached, as if the emotions, the stakes, everything that had brought us here were being held just out of reach. I glanced at my daughter and her in-laws as they sat across from me. My daughter, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her eyes avoiding mine. She had been trying to appear calm, collected, but I could see the tightness in her posture, the nervous twitch of her fingers. They knew what was coming. They knew we had them cornered. Her husband sat beside her, his usual smug smile nowhere to be seen. The in-laws were on the other side of the courtroom, their expressions stiff with arrogance. They were used to getting their way, used to manipulating people, but I could see the cracks beginning to show. They weren't as confident as they thought. Before the judge even walked in, I could hear their whispered conversations, the low murmur of their voices trying to strategize, trying to come up with a way to turn the tide in their favor. It was too late for that. They had made their move, and I was here to make sure they paid for it. I sat there waiting for the judge, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no illusions about this being easy. I knew how powerful they were, how well they could manipulate the situation. But we had the evidence. We had the documents. We had the truth. When the judge finally walked in, the room fell silent. He was a man who had seen it all before, his eyes scanning the room as he took his seat. He looked over the case files briefly, then glanced at the two opposing sides. We're here today to address the issue of the ownership of the villa located at 454 West Maple Drive, Beverly Hills, California. The judge began, his voice firm but not unkind. Lewis Turner is seeking to reclaim the property which he claims was wrongfully transferred to his daughter and her in-laws. We will proceed with the evidence. The moment of truth had arrived. My lawyer John stood up and made his case. He was methodical, precise, his voice calm and steady as he outlined the evidence. The forged signature, the fraudulent contract, the bank receipts showing the irregular transactions. Every piece of evidence had been meticulously prepared, and I watched as the judge absorbed each one, his face impassive. It was my turn to take the stand. I wasn't a lawyer, wasn't trained to speak in a courtroom, but I knew I had to do this. I had to show the court who I was, who I had been to my daughter, and what this villa meant to me. I stood up, feeling the weight of every moment, every decision that had led me here. My legs felt heavy as I walked the witness stand. I could feel the eyes of my daughter and her in-laws on me, their judgment pressing down like a weight. But I didn't flinch. The prosecutor asked me to recount what had happened, and I told the story as clearly as I could. I told them about the betrayal, about how my daughter had handed over the keys to my villa without even consulting me. I told them about the phone calls, the conversations, the desperate attempts to reason with her. I told them how I had worked my entire life to build something for my family, and how in an instant it had been taken from me. When I finished, there was silence in the room. Even my daughter didn't speak. She just sat there, her eyes downcast, her face unreadable. Then came the twist. My daughter's lawyer stood up and presented a document I hadn't seen before. It was a new contract, one that claimed my daughter had been acting on my behalf, that she had the legal right to make the transfer. It was an attempt to shift the narrative, to confuse the issue, but I could feel the blood rush to my face as I watched the document unfold. John immediately countered, presenting evidence of the fraudulent signature and the manipulation of the process. He pulled out the records of the transfers and contracts, showing that my daughter and her in-laws had used a variety of tactics to falsify everything. The contract they presented was a forgery, and the proof was irrefutable. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. My daughter's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. The court went silent again as the judge looked over the evidence, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. It felt like hours had passed, though it was only minutes. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, each beat seeming louder than the last. Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the transfer of the villa was done through fraudulent means. The contract is invalid. The actions taken by Miss Turner and her in-laws are deemed unlawful. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The moment I had been fighting for. The villa is to be returned to Mr. Lewis Turner, the judge continued, and the defendants are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. The case is closed. I felt the weight of the verdict hit me like a wave crashing over me. The villa was mine again, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. I turned to look at my daughter. She was pale, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this. Her in-laws were speechless too, their faces contorted with disbelief. But as I watched them, I felt no triumph, no joy. I had won, yes. But the cost, my relationship with my daughter, the emotional toll, was something I would never get back. I stood there in that courtroom and realized that the victory I thought I wanted didn't feel like victory at all. I thought getting the villa back would feel like victory. I imagined walking through those front doors, reclaiming what was mine, and feeling a rush of triumph. But when I actually stood there, keys in hand, staring at the house that had once been my future, all I felt was emptiness. The courtroom had been a battlefield, and I had won. But in the silence that followed, I began to realize that winning didn't bring back what I had lost. It didn't erase the pain, the betrayal, or the hole that now existed between me and my daughter. The villa felt colder than it ever had before. The rooms that once held memories of family gatherings, of laughter and warmth, now seemed hollow, Even the furniture felt foreign to me. Nothing felt the same. I had fought so hard for this. But standing there alone, it didn't feel like mine anymore. I spent the first few days walking through the villa, retracing my steps, trying to find some semblance of what it had once meant to me. But all I saw were reminders of the betrayal. The photos on the walls, the family heirlooms, none of it felt like a victory. It all felt like a reminder of the life that was slipping through my fingers. I hadn't heard from my daughter since the verdict. She hadn't called, hadn't tried to reach out, and why would she? After everything that had happened, after the way I had publicly humiliated her in court, I knew our relationship would never be the same. The silence between us was deafening. I had won back the villa, but I had lost my daughter. The thought gnawed at me day and night. Was it worth it? Was this what I had fought for all along? A house? A legacy? My phone buzzed one evening, and I looked down to see a text message from her. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected to hear from her. I hadn't expected anything. It was short, almost impersonal. I hope you're happy with your victory, Dad. You got what you wanted. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a pang of guilt twist in my gut. It wasn't just a message, it was a final farewell. She was done. She had shut the door, and no matter how much I wanted to open it again, I knew it was too late. I didn't respond. What could I say? I had fought for the villa, yes, but in the process I had lost the one thing that mattered most. My family. The next few days were a blur of phone calls with my lawyer, finalizing the legalities of the transfer. But the legal victory didn't matter to me anymore. The villa was mine again, but the cost was more than I could bear. I had been so focused on the battle, on the need to win, that I hadn't stopped to think about what would happen after. I hadn't stopped to think about the consequences of my actions. Now the weight of it all settled on me, heavy and suffocating. The house wasn't the prize I had imagined, it was just a symbol of my own failure. I found myself sitting in the living room, staring out the window, my mind racing. I had everything I fought for, but it didn't feel like enough. My daughter was gone. My family was shattered. The villa, once a symbol of everything I had worked for, now felt like a prison. The days turned into weeks, and the silence between us remained. I never saw her again, never spoke to her. I had no idea where she had gone, what she was doing, or if she even cared anymore. And it hurt. It hurt more than I could ever explain. I spent more time at the villa than I ever had before, but it never felt like home again. I had reclaimed it, yes, but I had lost something far more important in the process. The betrayal had been too great, and no amount of money, no legal victory could replace the trust I had once had in my daughter. One afternoon I sat in the backyard, the sun low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the garden. I thought about the life I had once imagined here, the barbecues, the holidays, the laughter of my daughter and her family. It all seemed so far away now. The victory was hollow. I had won the battle, but the war had taken its toll. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I was empty inside. I stood up and walked back into the house, the cool air of the villa making me shiver. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: no victory, no matter how sweet, could ever make up for the damage that had been done. I had gotten what I wanted, but in the end I realized that it wasn't what I needed, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to repair the damage I had caused. I had gotten what I thought I wanted, but now as I stood in the villa, the silence felt suffocating. The sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty hallways was the only noise in the house. The house that had once been my future, my legacy, now seemed like a hollow shell. The court had ruled in my favor. I had reclaimed the villa. The paperwork was all in order. The battle was over, but the war, that was far from done. I sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace, my mind racing through everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the courtroom, my daughter. I couldn't shake the thought that something was missing. Was I really better off? Was this victory truly worth it? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like I had been fighting for something that wasn't even mine to reclaim. The villa had once represented my success, my years of hard work, but now it felt like a symbol of my failure. A failure to protect the one thing that mattered most. My family. I had won the case, but I had lost my daughter in the process. The last time I saw her in that cold courtroom was the last time I would ever see her again. She had walked out of my life, and no legal victory could bring her back. I had expected closure, a sense of finality, but instead I felt nothing but emptiness. What good was a house if it meant losing everything else? What good was a victory if it meant losing the trust of the people I loved? I tried to reach out to her, to apologize, to fix things, but she never responded. I called, sent messages, even left letters at her doorstep, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. As the days turned into weeks, I started to understand the true cost of my actions. I had set out to reclaim my legacy, my villa, my pride, but in the process, I had torn apart the very thing I had spent my life building, my family. I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it, if the villa was really worth losing my daughter, my family, my peace of mind. The truth was, it wasn't. It never had been. The house, once a symbol of everything I had worked for, now felt like a burden. I couldn't shake the thought that I had traded my relationship with my daughter for something that, in the end, didn't matter. What was a villa compared to the bond we had shared? What was a legal victory when it meant the complete destruction of the one thing that had always mattered the most to me? The weight of it all was crushing. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war, and as I sat there in the villa, I realized that justice, true justice, wasn't about winning at all. It wasn't about taking back what was mine. It was about understanding the consequences of my actions and accepting that sometimes what we fight for isn't worth the cost. The truth settled in, heavy and undeniable. Justice wasn't about the villa. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about love, trust, and understanding. And I had lost all of that in my pursuit of something that in the end was just a house. I couldn't go back and undo what had been done, but I could reflect, learn, and hopefully find a way to rebuild what had been destroyed. The villa would remain mine, but it no longer felt like home. What was the point of victory if it meant losing everything else? What was the cost of justice if it came at the expense of my family? As I sat there, I understood that sometimes the greatest loss isn't what we fight to gain, but what we lose in the process. I stood in the villa once more, the same rooms I had walked through so many times before. But today, they felt different. The air was heavier, thicker with the memories of what had happened, of what I had lost. The house was mine again, but it no longer felt like home. The walls that had once held so many hopes, so many dreams, now seemed cold and indifferent. I had fought for this, fought for the right to call it mine once more. But now that I had it, the victory felt hollow. The silence, the absence of my daughter, was deafening. I walked through the rooms, each step echoing in the emptiness. The kitchen where we had shared countless meals, the living room where we had celebrated holidays, the garden where my daughter had once played with her children. All of it was gone. The life I had imagined, the family I had dreamed of, had slipped away, and in its place, I was left with a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I thought back to everything I had fought for: the villa, my legacy, my sense of justice. I had worked my entire life for this house, for the security it represented. But what had I really gained in the end? A house? A legal victory? Yes, but at what cost? I had lost my daughter. I had lost the trust and love of the one person who had once been my pride and joy. It wasn't just the villa that had been taken from me. It was the family I had built, the connection I had with my daughter. The cost of winning this battle had been greater than I had ever imagined. I had stood tall in the courtroom. I had fought for what I believed was mine, and I had won. But as I sat there in the villa, I realized that sometimes winning isn't the victory we expect it to be. Sometimes the things we fight for come at a price that's too high to pay. The truth was undeniable now. I had made a mistake. I had let my pride, my anger, my need for justice blind me to the consequences of my actions. I had let the pursuit of what I thought was mine take precedence over what truly mattered: my relationship with my daughter, the love and trust that had been shattered in the wake of my need for revenge. I couldn't undo what had been done. The damage had been done, and the relationship with my daughter was beyond repair. No amount of money, no legal victory could bring that back. I looked out the window, my mind racing through everything that had happened. I had fought so hard, so relentlessly to get the villa back. But now that I had it, all I felt was the weight of what I had lost. I had gained a house, but I had lost my family. I had reclaimed my property, but I had lost my peace of mind. I walked through the villa one last time, lingering in each room, letting the silence wash over me. It was the silence of a victory that felt like defeat. It was the silence of a man who had won the battle but lost everything else in the process. The house was mine, but the truth was clear now. The cost of justice, the cost of revenge was too high. I had been blinded by my need to reclaim what was taken from me, but in the process I had destroyed everything that had ever truly mattered. The final lesson I learned was this. Sometimes what we think we want isn't worth what we lose along the way. The villa wasn't worth the price I had paid. No material possession, no amount of money could ever make up for the loss of love, trust, and family. As I stood there in the villa, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. The true cost of revenge isn't just measured in what we gain, it's measured in what we lose, and I had lost more than I could ever replace. So I sat down, looking at the empty rooms, and I vowed to rebuild, not the house, but the life that I had let slip away. It would take time, it would take effort, but I knew now that the greatest lesson in loss wasn't about getting back what was mine. It was about understanding what truly mattered and finding peace within myself.